All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to unpack how the traditional, grease and diesel trucking industry is colliding head-on with a massive technological and regulatory overhaul. We're looking at the 2026 Canadian Less-Than-Truckload freight landscape, and let me tell you, what used to be a business of manual docs and handwritten logbooks is undergoing a completely ruthless digital transformation right now. If these carriers don't adapt, they literally won't survive.
We've got this complex shift organized into a clear roadmap for you today. We'll quickly cover Canada's LTL freight backbone, meet the market leaders, 3 massive industry headwinds, the high-tech industry pivot, and finally, the future of freight.
So, Section 1. Canada's LTL freight backbone. It's basically the circulatory system of the Canadian economy.
Take a look at this staggering number. $116.63 billion. That is the 2026 estimated market valuation of the entire Canadian freight and logistics sector. It's just a colossal economic engine, and road freight holds over 60% of that whole revenue pie. We're not just talking about moving boxes here. This is the literal lifeblood of the nation's commerce. It handles absolutely everything, from raw manufacturing materials to, the consumer goods sitting on retail shelves today.
Now, our core focus today is less-than-truckload, or LTL freight. If you're not super familiar, think of LTL kind of like carpooling, but for cargo, right? Not every business needs a massive 53-foot trailer entirely to themselves. So LTL consolidates shipments from dozens of different companies into one single shared trailer to maximize efficiency. It is the absolute backbone for the manufacturing, wholesale, and retail sectors. It's incredibly efficient, but as you're going to see, in 2026, it is also unbelievably complex to actually manage.
Moving right along to Section 2, meet the market leaders. The titans of Canadian trucking. Let's take a look at our main legacy players here. TFI International, Manitoulin Transport, and Day & Ross. These guys aren't just trucking companies, they're massive logistical empires, and each one has a really distinct operational strategy. You've got TFI, which is a public behemoth, totally known for its incredible capital discipline and a really asset-light approach. Then there's Manitoulin, a 100% Canadian-owned private powerhouse that is aggressively expanding its physical footprint. And finally, Day & Ross, an asset-backed subsidiary of McCain Foods, the French fry guys, and they just dominate with dedicated contract logistics and a massive cross-border presence. When you stack up their pure Canadian LTL revenues, you're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars for each carrier. Massive, massive numbers. But here's the catch. Despite this historic dominance, every single one of these titans is currently facing a perfect storm of existential threats that are actively eating away at their traditional profit margins.
Which brings us to Section 3, 3 massive industry headwinds. We're talking regulatory crackdowns, border friction, and serious margin compression.
Okay, so the first massive headwind is regulatory. For decades, a huge chunk of this industry basically relied on something called the Driver Inc. loophole. Essentially, fleets were encouraging drivers to incorporate as independent businesses, which meant they were completely avoiding statutory payroll deductions, things like the Canada Pension Plan and employment insurance. This little trick let non-compliant fleets undercut the market by like 10 to 15%. But in 2026, the CRA and ESDC instituted a very strict mandate. Now, any payment over $500 requires T4A reporting. Bam! This is triggering massive joint agency audits, immediately forcing huge payroll cost increases on fleets who suddenly have to classify these workers properly. The era of cheap, off-the-books capacity, it's completely over. The second headwind is severe yield degradation. Let's look at TFI International as a prime example. Recently, they actually saw their LTL shipment volumes rise by 7.5%. Now, that sounds great, right? More freight, more money. But incredibly, their revenue per shipment dropped by 2%. You might be wondering, why on earth would that happen? Well, it's because they, like a lot of legacy carriers, were trapped in these unprofitable long-term blanket pricing contracts with third-party logistics brokers. So they were literally doing more work, hauling way more freight, but making less money because their pricing models were just hopelessly outdated.
Finally, the third headwind is cross-border friction. The new Canada Border Services Agency CARM system now shifts financial security directly onto the importer. Remember how we said LTL works like carpooling? Well, imagine a single 53-foot trailer containing freight from 30 different companies. Under this new system, if there's a single paperwork error or a missing bond from just one of those 30 importers, it traps the entire consolidated trailer right there at the border, the whole thing. It completely paralyzes schedules, inflates dwell times, and creates just massive cascading backlogs at the terminals.
Let's pivot to Section 4, the high-tech industry pivot, moving from grease and diesel right over to silicone and data.
So we really have to ask the obvious question here. If legacy blanket pricing is causing a 2% drop in revenue, even when volume goes up,
what is the immediate solution? I mean, how do you fix a fundamentally broken pricing system in real time?
Well, the answer is artificial intelligence and dynamic dimensioning. It's super cool. Carriers are installing these highly advanced sensors right on their crossdocks. So, as a pallet rolls by, the system instantly records its exact density, weight, and spatial metrics. Boom, just like that. And that data feeds directly into an AI pricing engine. Instead of relying on some generalized, outdated broker rate, the AI immediately flags any underdeclared freight and dynamically corrects the tariff on the spot. By swapping out manual dock management for these AI sensors, carriers are instantly restoring their pricing power. They're basically purging all that unprofitable freight right out of their networks.
But as we know, software alone just isn't enough. They have to pair this AI with hard physical assets. To avoid the crazy delays caused by third-party interline partners, these titans are aggressively expanding their own terminal density. For instance, Manitoulin just opened this massive 23,000 square foot, 22-door AI-integrated hub in Moncton, while simultaneously expanding 9 other terminals coast to coast. TFI is actually going the other route. They're aggressively consolidating their massive 620-facility network to really maximize their free cash flow. And Day & Ross? They've entirely restructured their executive leadership team specifically to drive these rapid digital tech overhauls. The whole idea is to control their networks end-to-end, to ensure velocity and, most importantly, compliance.
All right, bringing us to our final part, Section 5, the future of freight. Specialized capacity and sustainable modernization.
Take a look at this figure, 4.78%. That right there is the compound annual growth rate of Canadian cold chain transport, and it perfectly represents the final and perhaps most crucial strategic pivot for these companies going forward.
So to offset those rising labor costs from the CRA crackdowns we talked about, the market leaders are actively ditching cheap, highly competitive dry van commodity freight. It's just not worth it anymore. Instead, they're deploying multi-temperature trailers to capture high-value pharmaceutical and food logistics. They are totally doubling down on certified hazardous materials transport. They're even launching dedicated fleet management, which is essentially outsourcing corporate private fleets to guarantee recurring revenue. TFI is even redirecting capital into hyper-specialized heavy haul for aerospace, data centers, and wind energy. The strategy across the board is incredibly clear: specialize or starve.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? The crucial point you should take away from this explainer is that in 2026, operational compliance and digital integration are absolutely no longer optional. They are mandatory for survival. The carriers that can successfully pair automated AI yield management with fully compliant, by-the-book labor models, those are the ones that are going to secure sustainable market share.
Which leaves us with a fascinating reality to ponder. In a massive national industry that is rapidly transitioning from grit and diesel to gigabytes and data, who actually has the agility to adapt, and who is inevitably going to disappear into operational obsolescence? It's going to be wild to watch. Thanks so much for joining me to unpack this incredible shift, and I highly encourage you to keep a close eye on how these logistical empires evolve over the next few years. Catch you next time!